Blessings in Jesus, dear friends. This is James Jacob Prasch from Warrior Ministries and RTN TV, speaking to you for this week in prophecy. And an incredible week it has been. It's become apparently clear that even major world events are going to be underreported when they are not in line with the biased political agenda of the mainstream media. The events of this past week have been absolutely stupendous concerning the events in the White House when President Trump invited the rulers of the United Arab Emirates and Benjamin Netanyahu to the White House for the Abraham Accords. Now, the prophetic significance of this is immense. But even in secular terms, you would think the media would give it the kind of attention it received, if not with Camp David back in the 1970s, certainly the peace treaty between Israel and Jordan. None of that is happening. It's being ignored, it's being downplayed, simply because it shows Donald Trump in a favorable light. But let's try to examine this scripturally. The United Arab Emirates and now Bahrain have agreed to diplomatic relations and trade relations with Israel. Pushing this has undoubtedly been a common fear of Iran and the Iranian threat, and it has been orchestrated successfully by the White House. Mr. Kushner's personal envoy has been Jared Kushner, an unsaved Jew who is Mr. Trump's son-in-law. Let's understand this, however, in its totality. Bahrain is the first Shiite, not Sunni, but Shiite Islamic country to recognize Israel. Iran, of course, has denounced this treaty brokered by Mr. Trump, the Abraham Accords, as has, of course, the Palestinian Authority, but more so Hamas and, of course, Hezbollah, who are surrogates of Iran. There is, however, another side to this coin. Let's look at it. There have been people in Norway who have nominated Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. This is very unlikely to happen. The Nobel Peace Prize is perhaps the biggest joke since the Oscars. Nobody in their right mind can take such a thing seriously or lend it any credence. I recall Lee Van Dyke and Henry Kissinger were given the Nobel Peace Prize for ending the Vietnam War, but it didn't end. People like Jerry Adams, who'd been party to the ugliest form of Irish terror, and by the way, my mother's family are Irish Catholic, but I do not believe that provisional IRA represents true historical republicanism. The bombings in Oman and some of these other attacks were barbaric. Yet Jerry Adams receives the Nobel Peace Prize. Let's go further with this. Yasser Arafat, a terrorist, received the Nobel Peace Prize. The United Nations High Commission for Refugees, which is a bureaucratic wasteland of misappropriation and misallocation, received the Nobel Peace Prize. The Nobel Peace Prize was also awarded to Barack Obama for absolutely nothing. He did absolutely nothing, but he was awarded the Peace Prize. Well, Mr. Trump has done something. Therefore, it is not likely he will get the Nobel Peace Prize. In order to get the Nobel Peace Prize, you either have to be a terrorist or somebody who does nothing. He doesn't really qualify. He's not a serious contender. But now I'd like to look at the downside or the troubling side of the Abraham Accords. First of all, the name. In Abu Dhabi, they are building an interfaith worship center of nominal Christianity, Talmudic Judaism, and Islam at the Abrahamic family. One second, please. They are building an ecumenical worship center in Abu Dhabi called the Abrahamic Family House, or House of Worship of the Abrahamic family, ascribing Christianity, Judaism, and Islam all to the faith of Abraham. Now, of course, Abraham worshipped Yahweh, the God of Israel and the God of Christians and Jews. Islam references Ibrahim, Abraham, as a patriarch. However, it worships Allah, the Nabatean moon god. It is not an Abrahamic faith at all, although Arabs are anthropologically descendant from Abraham. It's nothing to do with his faith or with his beliefs. Christianity and Judaism, yes, except the Christianity represented has to do with liberal Protestantism and the Roman papacy. And the Judaism represented has to do with rabbinic or Talmudic Judaism. 3 false religions, 3 perversions of the faith of Abraham in the name of peace, building a house of worship in the Persian Gulf. This is a forerunner, a foreshadow of Antichrist. We have said this often. The Antichrist will come in the character of Herod the Great. We see this when we interpret Daniel's book in light of Revelation chapter 12, and we interpret Revelation 12 in light of Daniel. You have a Pesher interpretation of the nativity narrative. The dragon tries to kill the baby coming out of the woman. The baby is rescued, and the dragon makes war with the woman and the rest of her offspring. The Antichrist will replay what Herod did. He tries to prevent the rapture. When the rescue happens of the man-child, then Satan will go and make war against Israel and the rest of her offspring. Anybody who becomes a Christian at that time will be facing a death sentence at the hands of Antichrist once the rapture and resurrection takes place, and many will be, of course, persecuted and martyred even before. No, this is going to happen. He comes in the character of Herod, as we've said many times. Herod to the Jews was a Jew. However, ethnically, his parents were Idumean. They were Edomites who converted to Judaism and settled in the northern Negev. So ethnically, he was an Arab. By religion, he was a Jew. By culture, politics, and nationality, however, Herod the Great was a Roman. The Romans considered him to be a Roman. His culture was Greco-Roman. He was even put in charge of the Olympics by the imperial government. The Romans looked upon him as one of them. They did not have procurators like Pilate when Herod was there. Pontius Pilate came afterwards. As long as Herod was there, the Romans didn't see a need to send a surrogate or to send a Roman. That's how much they trusted Herod and how much they considered him to be one of them. To the Jews, he was a Jew by way of religious and political convenience. Claimed to be king of the Jews. Again, an impostor, a false Messiah. Jesus is king of the Jews, the rightful descendant of David. Herod was not. And then, of course, ethnically, to the Arabs, to the Idumeans from Jordan, he was one of them. We live in a world, as we said, Buddhists are waiting for the 5th Buddha. New Agers are waiting for Maitreya and the cosmic Christ. Christians are waiting for the return of Christ. Jews are waiting for the Messiah. Muslims are waiting for the Mahdi. Everybody's waiting for someone, and in some way the Antichrist is going to come and present himself as being all things to all men in the character of Herod the Great. He's going to convince the Jews he's one of them, the Arabs he's one of them, and he's going to convince the Europeans that he's one of them. Everybody's going to think he's one of us. But in fact, he doesn't belong to the Jews. He doesn't belong to the Arabs. He doesn't belong to the West. He belongs to Satan. Now, the stage is being set. You're seeing these false religions coming together, claiming to be the descendants of Abram. I do not want to discourage in any way prayer for President Bush. I do not want to discourage in any way prayer for President Trump. I voted for him, I pray for him daily, and I hope to God he gets elected again to keep these other wicked pro-abortion, pro-same-sex marriage villains out of the White House. I pray that God shows America mercy and stops Biden and Harris and Antifa and the ultra-left. However, my faith is in Jesus, not in any politician. Yes, Mr. Trump is surrounded by people, some of whom are believers. Jay Sekulow, a Messianic Jewish lawyer, absolutely Mr. Trump's attorney. Mike Pence, absolutely a former Catholic, even though he will not say that publicly. That's what he, in effect, is. Mike Pompeo is said to be a saved believer, and so forth. Mr. Trump has been very sympathetic to evangelical concerns concerning persecution, Christian rights, pro-life, and so forth. He has been a bit soft on the same-sex marriage issue. Be that as it may, there's a downside. The United Arab Emirates are looking to acquire the F-35 fighter plane. It is the second most advanced fighter plane in the world, second only to the F-22. Israel has the F-35. The Arab nations do not. Israel will not have a strategic edge in the area of fighter aircraft if the F-35 is sold to the Arab countries. Now, this has happened before with the F-15 and F-16, particularly F-15, and with the AWACS. There were major political battles with the Reagan administration over the desire to sell these things to the Saudi Arabians. And there had to be strongly controlled conditions, like Americans in the cockpits of the AWACS and so forth. This is not the first time this problem has happened. But whenever it has happened, Israel has had to get something in exchange to keep its edge. There are only two possibilities. One is Israel getting the F-22, which is completely illegal. The F-22 is the most stealthy fighter aircraft ever developed. The United States is not allowed to sell it to other countries for fear its technology will be stolen and imitated by China, Russia, etc., or other competitive nations. It's not at the present time legal for America to sell the F-22 to anybody. The rape gear. The other possibility is the Moab, the mother of all bombs. An air fusion explosion. It makes the daisy cutters seem like firecrackers in comparison. The Moab can be ignited in the atmosphere and destroy a large area resembling a Hiroshima bombing minus the radiation. That's how powerful it is. It would look like a minor Hiroshima if it was detonated in the atmosphere. However, if it is exploded terrestrially, it can destroy the subterranean caverns and tunnel systems where the Iranians keep their nuclear weapons and the apparatus needed to attack Israel with those weapons. The Moab is capable of doing it. If the United States provides the Moab to Israel, Israel will have the capacity to unilaterally deal with the Iranians. Now, it's not likely this would happen out of concert with the United States, but once the Israelis get it, they've got it. This is something to watch carefully. This, however, is not the main thing to watch. Jared Kushner, again, is a Jew. He's not a left-wing Jew. He's not a Menelaus Jew. He's not like Chuck Schumer. He's not like Debbie Wasserman Schultz. He's not like Adam Schiff. He's not like these other left-wing Jewish politicians, Jerry Nadler and so forth, that will turn their back on Israel so easily. He is not like George Soros. He is not like Sergey Brin or these people in Silicon Valley. He's not like that. He's not like Michael Bloomberg. He's not one of these left-wing Jews who are willing to throw Israel under the bus. Again, the latter-day Menelauses that we read about in the book of Daniel, chapter 11, who resurface in the last days, and they have resurfaced. Mark Zuckerberg being one of them, but not the only. Okay, we have that. People in the Democratic Party in America who are in the same party with the so-called quartet, with people who are vehemently anti-Semitic and intent on Israel's annihilation. Omet, Tliab, supported by Alejandro Ortega-Cortez, and so forth. No, Jared Kushner is not one of those. Neither, however, has Jared Kushner been a strongly conservative Jew like Mark Levin or like Michael Savage or David Horowitz. He's not in the Barry Goldwater camp of Jewish American conservatism. He's more centrist. Although he leans to the right, he's right-center, he has definitely shown himself as the president's envoy to be a man who is politically and diplomatically astute and willing to make deals. The Trump administration has been run on the business philosophy of Donald Trump. He fires a lot of people. If they can't do the job, he gets rid of them. Defense secretaries, national security advisors, you're fired, you're fired. Same as he did with his TV show. Same as he did with his business in real estate development. But also the art of the deal. Makes a deal. Part of the deal that Mr. Kushner has made under the tutelage of Donald Trump has been to reinforce the so-called two-state solution, as it's called. In this, Israel had to agree to something that the Trump administration had already given a de facto green light to. It had to agree to freeze its plans, at least temporarily, if not indefinitely, to annex certain portions of its biblical homeland in the West Bank. There is also an unspoken agreement to begin to curtail not only new settlements, but the expansion of existing ones within certain parameters. Now, we're not talking about a give back of the West Bank. We're not talking about anything of that nature having been proposed as yet. But we do see a reversal of something that Mr. Trump had initially signaled approval of: annexation of portions of the West Bank, particularly those close to Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. This, however, may have been part of his art of the deal. He created the narrative that he was going to support Israel's annexation of sections of the West Bank and of the Jordan Valley as an impetus for the Arab states to negotiate and stop it from happening. It's part of the deal, part of the way he does business. Again, he runs diplomacy the way he runs property development in New York City. Quite clever, but we have to be aware of what it means. Not moving the ancient boundary. You cannot make peace with fundamentalist Islam. It is not possible. You cannot trust fundamentalist Islam. You cannot make peace with fundamentalist Islam. I was in Las Vegas, not gambling, I don't gamble, but I have family there. The day when the famous magicians, Siegfried and Roy, one of them was attacked by a white lion that they used in their act for years. Now, they cultivated a relationship with these tigers. And I'm not saying they became careless, but the tiger still has the tiger instinct. And the tiger attacked him and nearly killed him. I was in Vegas the day it happened. Never forget it. It was a famous show. Many thousands and thousands and thousands of people saw it every month. It was amazing, some of the tricks they did with these animals, but one turned on him one time. This has happened with people who've kept animals such as Rottweilers as pets, who've kept boa constrictors as pets. There was a snake keeper, a professional hobbyist, who kept snakes as a hobby. And a boa constrictor killed him in his house. There's something in these animals. Fundamentalist Islam is like that. It is capable of reducing a human being to the mentality of a dangerous animal. It turns people into something animalistic in its fundamentalist expression. We've seen this with Western Muslims, highly educated Westernized Muslims. Physicians, a group of physicians in Scotland, attempted to bomb Glasgow Airport. We saw the famous story with Sally Fields, Not Without My Daughter. Again, a highly Westernized Iranian Shia Muslim, and what he did. There is something there that they can turn at any time. Now, I know people who I've led to Christ. There are several Iranian Shia Muslims, not a lot, but there are some, who I've led to Christ. Wonderful people, wonderful brethren in the Lord. And they told me firsthand about the mentality of fundamentalist Islam, particularly the Shia version of it. You cannot trust these people. Not only that, but remember, Islam has the doctrine of permissible lying, taqweed. They're allowed to lie to the infidel. And they have the doctrine of hudna, telling you they want peace, when in fact they mean a temporary ceasefire until they can get the advantage. To them, this is not lying. It is simply military disinformation in a jihad. Their religion teaches it. You cannot trust such people. If you have the upper hand, strategically, you can force Islamic nations to abide. If you have the upper hand economically, you can force them to abide. But look what happened in Egypt. They murdered Anwar Sadat, who was half Nubian, half Arab, for making peace with Israel. The Muslim Brotherhood attempted to take it over. General Assisi prevented Egypt from going against Camp David. And Barack Obama backed the Muslim Brotherhood. If there's any president who's betrayed this country, it was Barack Obama. It is unbelievable what he did with the Iranians, what he did in Egypt. It's unbelievable what that man did, but other presidents have acted against the national interest before. I can't say it's peculiar to him, but he certainly did. And he did it with Islam. So, of course, did George Bush after September 11th. He continued the express visa program for Saudi Arabians into the United States for a full year after the European countries banned it following September 11th. The Saudi Arabians funded and sponsored the September 11th attacks. Most of the terrorists were Saudi Arabian, as was Osama bin Laden's family. But the Bush family was in league through the Carlyle Group with investment interests in the oil-related industries. And unfortunately, the Bush administration was owned and operated by the same Saudi interests. That is the House of Saud, who funded Al-Qaeda. Obama was not the only president to sell the country down the river to radical Islam, but he certainly was one of them. Bush was another. Again, I don't say this to editorialize, I just say it so people will understand the importance of praying for the elections and praying for our leaders, that we will not get wicked men like we've had. These wicked leaders have been judgments on America. Barack Obama was a judgment on America. George Bush was a judgment on America. September 11th was a judgment on America. God let it happen. But let's continue. There's the settlement issue. And additionally, there are strategic concerns. Finally, there's the annexation issue. Be careful. I'm not suggesting anything, but we have to understand there will be a false peace in the Middle East before the Lord comes. The Antichrist will bring about a false peace between Jew and Arab, between Jew, Arab, and small c Christians. This will ultimately culminate with the abomination of desolations. Is Mr. Trump deliberately doing this? I don't believe he is. Are the unfolding of events leading up to this? I believe they are. Now let's continue looking at this. While the Abraham agreements, that is the Accords, were being signed in the White House, Hamas was launching rocket attacks on the Israeli port of Ashdod, a major port south of Tel Aviv. There were also rocket attacks. 8 of the 13 rockets launched from Gaza were intercepted by the Israeli Iron Dome. There were some casualties. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia has said it will not back the Accords. But Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince and the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia, has this week in prophecy continued to consolidate power by purging 4 major figures from the government, that is, from the Saudi equivalent of a cabinet. 2 of them were princes on grounds of corruption. He's consolidating power stronger and stronger. It may be he will need to do that to fall into line with the Abraham Accords. It is almost certain that Oman will fall into line with the Abraham Accords. The Trump administration says that 5 or 6 further Arab countries, making it about a total of 11, will fall into line with the Abraham Accords. And the very fact that it's called the Abraham Accords is more than interesting theologically and prophetically. Jared Kushner has gone to Doha this week in prophecy. This is another major factor. He went to Qatar. Qatar always plays both sides. It wants to be friendly to the West. It wants to be friendly to Iran. It wants to be friendly to Hamas. But now they have announced, following the visit of Mr. Kushner, that Hamas can no longer rely on the financial support of Qatar in the Gaza Strip. This increases pressure, certainly on Hamas, economically and politically. Qatar is having to fall into line under pressure from Saudi Arabia, under pressure from the United States, and under pressure from the surrounding Emirates. It has fallen into conflict, virtually, with Saudi Arabia over its disposition towards Iran and certain other issues. If Mr. Kushner can persuade Qatar to come on board with the Abraham Accords and to cease its support of radical Islamic terror in the form of Hamas, again, that will be a major achievement. Now let's continue looking at this. Meanwhile, Israel, the Israeli Air Force, conducted airstrikes south of Damascus at a place called Daraa, which is a centerpiece of Russian-sponsored and Iranian-sponsored radical Islamic militias in Syria. The Israelis carried out the strikes and have left at least 5 Iranian-backed radicals dead. This week in prophecy. The very time that the accords are being signed, Hamas stepped up its actions. Well, let's look further at this week in prophecy and see what is transpiring. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo warned France in its effort to broker some kind of a reconstituted government in Lebanon that the amount of weapons provided by Iran to Hezbollah will make French goals impossible. It is without doubt that the massive explosion that left 300,000 people plus homeless in Beirut was an explosion of ordnance and chemicals, possibly binary weapons, owned by Hezbollah. So it is. This week in prophecy, there has been a COVID surge in Israel. 5,000 diagnosed new cases. COVID is becoming a major problem in Israel politically. There are protests, there are demonstrations, there are rival positions. What is clear is what's happening in Israel is a microcosm of what's happening in the rest of the world. Overall, in the United States, it is going down, but in certain states, it is not going down. It is seen an upsurge, a second wave. There are areas of the UK experience a second wave. The likelihood is that this is a man-made virus constructed by the Chinese military due to its genome. One Chinese scientist, a whistleblower, appeared on the American media and made these claims. God bless her, God protect her. But China has inflicted a blow on the global economy, and it was willing to damage its own economy in order to damage the global economy to advance its interest. China is extremely dangerous. If someone like Mr. Trump is removed from office by the electorate, and the Chinese and Iranians desperately want him out of office, as does Vladimir Putin, but particularly China and Iran. And you have someone like Biden and Harris, who will only placate China the way Obama did and the way Bush did. We are going to have very serious problems. A weak, half-senile president and a vulgar, immoral woman who slept her way to political power in her affair with Willie Brown, Speaker of the legislature in California, in order to get his backing to become district attorney, and then the state attorney general, and then senator. This is a woman who was essentially a professional whore who was paid in political favors instead of money. But Kamala Harris is a professional whore. The woman is a complete and utter slut. She does not deny she did this. She does not deny this long-term affair with another woman's husband who had the political position and leverage to be instrumental in the advancement of her career. Some whores are paid with money in Hollywood. Some whores are paid with roles in movies. Kamala Harris was paid with political backing, but she is nothing more than a prostitute, a political prostitute, literally, who paid with sex for political backing, a complete and utter slut. Now, when you have a half-senile old man who does not have the wherewithal in his old age, as some older people do, to command the position and its responsibilities, people who vote for Biden essentially will be voting for Harris. Quite potentially, quite likely, they'll be voting to put a whore in the White House. A literal whore, a paid whore. I'm reminded that when an independent filmmaker exposed the sale of human body parts in California, completely illegal, of aborted fetuses, Kamala Harris prosecuted him, not those engaged in the illegal sale. She is a godless, evil, wicked woman, a daughter of Satan. Now, people like her will push people like me to desperately want Donald Trump to win. But I understand something. Our salvation is not in Donald Trump. Our only salvation and hope is in Jesus Christ. There is a serious and suspicious downside to the Abraham Accords, of which we all need to take heed and to be aware of. This week in prophecy, it was estimated that since the Trump administration's embargoes and sanctions against Iran that have been pushed for again in the UN, there has been a nearly 30%, at least 27% decrease in the gross domestic product, in the GDP of Iran. Iran is becoming more and more desperate. When desperate people like the mullahs become desperate, desperate people do desperate things. Up against the wall, Iran may resort to armed confrontation. Its problem now is the Emirates are collaborating against it with Israel. And if Israel does get the Moab, Iran will not be a secure state. Mr. Trump has played the chess game masterfully. The Barack Obama administration, with Hillary Clinton and John Kerry, released $150 billion into the Iranian economy, paid hundreds of millions more secretly and illegally in cash, trying to bribe the Iranians not to stop, but to slow down their nuclear development program without even inspections unless you gave them a month's notice. This was the policy of Obama, Clinton, and Kerry. That's what they did. It was absurd. The Iranians mocked America. They grabbed those American sailors, held them at gunpoint, made them kneel down with their hands on their head, and then John Kerry, having negotiated their release, thanked the Iranians. This is how disgusting and weak and pathetic these people are. Again, it would drive someone like me, and I'm sure many of you, to thank God we have a Donald Trump who has turned the tide on the Iranians. But there's a better chess player than Donald Trump, and it's Satan. We need to be very, very careful. Yes, I am voting for Donald Trump. Yes, I am praying for Donald Trump. God forbid Biden and Harris should ever get power. As someone described it to me, if that happens, the republic is fallen. And they may be right. However, as these riots continue in America, and the mainstream Democratic Party is taken over by radical socialists and those who pander to it, openly wanting race war, insanity, middle-class white young people who have nothing to complain about, engaging in political radicalism. Again, this is not like the left of the 1960s. I am a product of the left of the 1960s. I was a radical socialist in the 1960s during the era of Vietnam and civil rights. It's not the same left. Then you had an unconstitutional war. Americans without the right to vote yet were being drafted, sent to Vietnam to fight with their hands tied behind their back, unable to invade North Vietnam. While American multinational corporations under détente traded with the Soviets and the Chinese under Nixon, who were arming the North Vietnamese to kill Americans. Ships of America's allies, even Canada and Japan, were unloading hardware in Haiphong Harbor. I've been to Haiphong Harbor. This total betrayal of America. It was simply to generate corporate profits, and they told young people who refused to go to Vietnam that they were communist sympathizers and they were cowards and so forth, despite the fact that the war was unconstitutional and you were tying their hands behind their back so they couldn't fight and you wouldn't let them win, so you could have your corporations trade with the very communists who were providing the North Vietnamese with the wherewithal to kill them. That is how corrupt the Johnson and the Nixon administrations were. That is how corrupt the mainstream Republican Party and Democratic Party are. This kind of corruption did not begin with Bush and Obama. It goes back to Kissinger and so forth, and even before that, no point in elaborating. But it was a different situation. Black soldiers coming back from Vietnam, having been told they fought for freedom, could not, under the GI Bill, go to university in Alabama or Mississippi because they were black after they were in the military, supposedly fighting for the country. I remember that. And it was the Democratic Party who did it. They were the party of segregation, of Jim Crow, and before that of slavery. What are the differences? Then The Democratic Party was the corrupt establishment. It was the Solid South. It was the segregationists of the South. It was Senator Byrd, a member of the Klan from West Virginia. It was the mentor of Bill Clinton, George Faber. It was the segregationist father of Al Gore, the senator from Tennessee. This was the South. The Democrats were the enemies of the left. I think particularly of the Chicago trials, the Chicago 7, the riots at the Democratic National Convention under the Daley Cook County political machine. Now, however, the Democratic Party are the party of the left, run by the quartet and other such extremists or pandering to people who are. That's the first difference. Second difference. The left was really launched with the Berkeley free speech movement at Berkeley University, 1966. It was about free speech. Today, the left has a cancel culture. They're against free speech. You can't represent your views if you don't agree with them, and if you do, you're a racist or a sexist or something like this. There's no free speech. The left used to be for free speech. These people today on the left are not for free speech. They are fascists. Then, states' rights were the call and the ideology and philosophy of people who were against the left, particularly in the South. They did not like the federal government coming down and interfering with their segregationist policies. They claim states' rights and the heritage of the South going back to the Civil War. It was those people who were in favor of states' rights. Today, the left are in favor of states' rights. We will not collaborate or cooperate with the federal authorities in the arrest and deportation of illegal aliens, even ones that have committed crimes, and they do this in the name of states' rights. It's completely different left. No free speech. Now they're the ones into states' rights. Now the Democratic Party is not the enemy. The Democratic Party is the mouthpiece of the political left. And it goes on. Then the left was anti-segregation, anti-racial discrimination. Today, the left wants black-only zones, free from whiteness. Open racism. The left had been against racism. Now it is racist. Blacks can't go to university in Alabama or Mississippi because they're black. Now Asians and often Caucasians can't go to university because they're not black, because places are given by affirmative action to black applicants who have lower test grades than the Asians particularly. Another minority. Discrimination against another minority. This is the left. They used to oppose discrimination against minorities in the 60s. Now they favor it and perpetrate it. What an insult to capable, qualified black people, of which there are many. You can't make it because you're black. Therefore, you must vote for us and we'll let you into Yale University, even though that Chinese or Indian student has higher grades than you do. The left had been against bigotry, discrimination. Now it is the party of discrimination. It is the force for racism. The left of today is not the left of then. It was the Ku Klux Klan in the American South who supported gun control. They invented it in part, not exclusively, but in part in order to stop black people from defending themselves against lynchings by the Klan. Now, who wants gun control? The so-called left, except when it comes to them. Goes on and on and on. Coming out of the 1950s into the 1960s, the nation lived under the shadow and memory of McCarthyism. You're a communist, you're a Russian collaborator, you're a Soviet agent, a Russian spy. This all went on beginning with the Rosenbaums and the atomic bomb spies, and then through the McCarthy era with the alcoholic Senator Joseph McCarthy, and the homosexual Jewish lawyer, his counterpart in counsel Roy Cohen, and of course J. Edgar Hoover. Many would say Ronald Reagan, as president of the Screen Actors Guild at the time, was a collaborator. This was McCarthyism. It's Russian collusion. It's collusion with the communists. It was the right who was accused of that, or at least the establishment. Now it's the left who are the McCarthyists. McCarthyism as it exists now is a left-wing phenomenon. Mr. Trump is into Russian collusion. He works for Putin. He's supported by Putin. They're the McCarthyists. The people who had once been the victims of McCarthyism now see the new left as the McCarthyists. Everything you see today is the diametric opposite of what the left had been in the 1960s. These people are not the left. They are more akin, as I've said, to another kind of socialist, the Nazis. Hitler was a socialist, and Antifa and Black Lives Matter have a lot more in common with the Waffen and the brown shirts and the black shirts than they do with the left of the 1960s, as in the original Black Panther Party, the Youth International Party, of which I was a member, SDS, Students for Democratic Society, etc. The left today has nothing to do with that. Nothing. These things push me to thank God for Donald Trump, to vote for him, to pray for him, for his administration, for his family. And I believe there's a spiritual battle to destroy him. I believe he may be the last hope for any semblance of Judeo-Christian safety, security in the United States. You look at it. Churches are being fined and being told it's illegal to meet, even when they practice wearing masks and social distancing, while, again, rioting crowds of protesters are allowed to meet no problem. But you can't go to church. You can tear down a statue, have a riot, but you can't go to... This is what's really happening in these democratic states. And so I vote for Donald Trump. And I pray for Donald Trump and will continue to. But I don't trust any politician. I don't trust a non-politician. I don't trust anybody but Jesus. The Abraham Accords ought to set off, not necessarily alarm bells at this point, but certainly a flashing red light on the dashboard. It is not only the Middle East and the United States, however, where major events are transpiring of prophetic significance this week in prophecy. I'd like to conclude by looking at two things in Europe, one of which is being grossly underreported. The Trump administration has been using oil trade and economics to broker a accord between Kosovo and Serbia, between Muslims and Eastern Orthodox Christians who've been historically inimical to each other. Why is Donald Trump bringing this peace to this area? He's bringing a peace. It may be a false peace, a temporary peace, a peace based on economic interest. Call it more of a ceasefire, but within his diplomatic actions, he has persuaded the Belgrade government of Serbia to move their embassy to Jerusalem, Israel. These things need to be noted. Finally, in Great Britain, there is a near parliamentary crisis. It goes back to the time of Theresa May, a woman who never should have been prime minister, who had no business being prime minister. But the Tory party establishment pushed her into office in number 10 Downing Street against the democratic will of the British people and against the democratic will of the members of the conservative Tory party. The Europhiles of the Conservative Party wanted trade agreements with Europe that would be post-Brexit, that in essence would have kept Britain subject to European trade regulations, only now without any voice in the European Parliament or in the Brussels bureaucracy and Council of Europe to represent British interests. We just have to abide by your laws, even though we can't even help make them anymore. Something worse than the EU was going to be perpetrated on Britain by the EU with the blessings of the Tory party establishment and the Labour Party establishment. People like David Cameron, John Major, etc., Tony Blair certainly. Although the country voted for Brexit, the establishment pushed in to office, into number 10, a pro-Remain, anti-Brexit prime minister who did everything she could to leave a booby trap for Britain, leave Britain entangled in the dictates of Europe without even any representation in Europe. This was Theresa May. By the grace of God, she was removed. The Northern Irish Unionists saved her neck and saved the country from the nightmare of a Labour government under the Jew-hating Jeremy Corbyn, as most people see him. Certainly, most people I know see him. Nonetheless, one of these accords remains. Now, we have to understand something. This does not just involve the EU or Britain or Ireland. It also indirectly involves the United States. The Clinton administration brokered the Good Friday agreements between the Irish Republicans, Sean McGuinness, Gerry Adams, and the Stormont Protestants, the Unionists, to end 25, 30 years of terror and violence. Largely it is held, but there's a great fear in Ireland and in the UK generally, but especially in Ireland, both north and south, of this ever being reignited. Nobody wants it. The Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who like Donald Trump is a native New Yorker, he was born in New York City, has proposed legislation for internal marketing called the Internal Market Bill, because the European Union has agreements from Theresa May that it can impose trade restrictions between Northern Ireland and mainland Britain. But Johnson says these agreements never should have been made. However, his bill on internal market the Internal Market Bill, is seen to be by most people in violation of international law. Britain entered these treaties. It looks like an effort to cut off Northern Ireland from the rest of Britain economically to a degree by giving Europe a say in trade between Scotland, Wales, England, and Northern Ireland, in order to preserve good diplomatic and trade relations between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. This is quite a complex situation. There should have been some kind of negotiation between Ireland and Great Britain that did not involve Europe, but that was not possible. Now you have a situation where the Republic of Ireland is EU, same as the continent, same as Germany and Spain. Northern Ireland is not. But what about trade between North and South Ireland? Ireland is one country with two halves, just as much as it's two countries. This is the issue. There is a fear that if these free trade agreements break down between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, it will spur political hostility and reignite the crisis. The European Union played this card to try to keep a hand not just on the Republic of Ireland, but on Northern Ireland. So, if Ireland, which is EU, can trade freely with Northern Ireland, therefore Northern Ireland cannot trade freely with England or Scotland or Wales because they've traded with the EU country. The goods and services have crossed the border. The bill, the legislation proposed by Boris Johnson, would cancel this. But he's facing tremendous opposition from the British establishment, even within his own party. Now, you have to understand the Tory party in Britain is like the Republican Party in America. If you don't understand this, I'll explain it. People like Romney, okay, and former Senator Jeff Flake, and Senator Collins from Maine, and the late John McCain, the Bush family. These are establishment Republicans. These are essentially Democrats who sit on the opposite side of the aisle. But they're functionally Democrats in the Republican Party. They are the Republican Party establishment. Mr. Bush did not just run against the Democrats. He ran against the Republicans, the establishment Republicans, the Bush machine, the Bush dynasty, etc. In Britain, it's the same. You have the establishment conservatives who are pro-Europe, pro-EU, and you have the real conservatives who are pro-British. There's a spiritual battle in Britain, as there is in America, and as there is in Israel. What a mess, but what a time to be alive. All of these things are of incredible prophetic significance. We'll be doing a teaching shortly on, is this Gog and Magog? But the events of this week in prophecy do raise several questions concerning the possibilities of Ezekiel chapters 37, 38, and 39, which we'll deal with on the video, Lord willing. Please keep these situations in prayer. My name is James Jacob Prasch from Moriel Ministries and RTN Christian TV. God bless and thank you for listening. Jesus is coming soon.